As dawn broke over Vatican City, a strange hush consumed the sacred grounds. This was no ordinary morning. The bells did not toll in routine, but in mourning. Pilgrims stopped mid-step, and choirs fell silent. Pope Francis, the voice of the voiceless, had passed away. His absence was not marked by chaos but by stillness, a quiet more powerful than applause. The cobblestones of St. Peter's Square bore witness to grief too sacred for words. The world paused, not in panic, but reverence. For a moment, even the sky seemed unsure of how to go on. It was the end of an era, the passing of a man who taught us that the gospel was not just preached, it was walked. A pope of action, not tradition. His final silence echoed louder than any sermon, leaving behind not just a spiritual vacuum, but a silence in which we were all meant to listen. From balcony to battlefield, a papacy of mercy. When Pope Francis first stepped onto the balcony in 2013, he didn't look like a warrior. But in truth, he waged war every day, not with weapons, but with mercy. From leper colonies to war zones, from prison cells to refugee camps, he walked into humanity's darkest corners, carrying nothing but faith and open arms. He was not content with lofty words. He descended from thrones, washed the feet of prisoners, and kissed the foreheads of forgotten children. He did not rule from a marble tower. He walked the alleys of pain, calling the church back to its first love, compassion. His enemies were apathy, division, and hypocrisy. His weapon was tenderness. And now that his voice has stilled, we are left with his battlefield, our world, where the war for dignity, for love, for humanity must continue without him. A soldier of peace has fallen, but his campaign of mercy lives on. The final message, a whisper from the edge of eternity. In the final days of his life, Pope Francis didn't retreat. He wrote. With lungs failing and strength waning, he penned a final message not to the powerful, but to the world's wounded. It wasn't a doctrinal decree, it was a soul's farewell. He spoke of love as resistance, unity as survival, and kindness as a form of courage. No anger, no fear, just clarity. His words moved like candlelight in a storm, delicate, warm, unwavering. Be not afraid, they whispered, be tender. He asked us not to honor him with statues, but with action, not with applause, but with mercy. And perhaps that was the most powerful goodbye of all, a call to become what we say we believe. This wasn't just the end of a papacy, it was the passing of a flame, the kind that doesn't die but seeks to be carried forward, hand to trembling hand, heart to open heart. A pope among the people, now gone. He didn't ride in gold-trimmed processions. He walked. He didn't rule behind closed doors. He opened them. Pope Francis was not just a pontiff. He was a presence. He chose a modest guest house over regal quarters. He answered letters by hand. He blessed the sick in secret and celebrated Mass in corners the cameras never saw. In an age of spectacle, he chose sincerity. And in that choice, he became more than a pope. He became ours. He belonged to the widow in Buenos Aires, to the refugee child in Syria, to the prisoner aching for forgiveness. And now he belongs to the heavens. But the streetlights where he once walked, the chapels he once knelt in, the hearts he once healed, they remember. His absence is not just in Vatican halls, but in every soul he saw, every name he remembered. We mourn not just a leader, but a friend. Rome weeps, a city draped in ashes. The eternal city is no stranger to mourning, but today she wept differently. Her skies turned gray not with storm, but with sorrow. The bells of St. Peter's tolled not just for ritual, but for rupture. From cafes to cathedrals, a silence fell like dust. Citizens and strangers alike gathered before the Vatican gates, clutching rosaries and candles, searching the sky for meaning. They had come for closure, for communion, for him, for the man who called them brothers and sisters, who never turned from the poor or the broken. The streets where he once smiled now felt hollow. The wind carried no chants, only whispers of prayer. Even the pigeons seemed to fly more gently. Rome knew this loss was bigger than itself. This was grief not confined to a country or church. This was the whole world losing its spiritual heartbeat. And still, from silence, his legacy began to sing. A shepherd's goodbye. The last walk of Francis. He did not fear death. He welcomed it like an old companion. In his final days, Pope Francis moved slower, but with a strange peace. His steps were small but deliberate, his hands weak but never idle. He smiled more, talked less, and listened like a man making peace with every heartbeat. He celebrated Mass with few, wrote letters to the forgotten, and blessed visitors with the weight of eternity in his gaze. This was a shepherd walking home, and as his breath faded, his spirit grew louder. He was not leaving us, he was showing us how to go, with humility, grace, and unwavering love. His goodbye was not a cry, but a quiet passing of the torch. In the simple acts of kindness we now carry forward, he walks beside us still. And though the staff he once held now leans against an empty chair, his journey is not yet done. The fire that never faded. From the moment he survived a near-fatal lung infection in youth, Pope Francis carried weakness in his body, but strength in his soul. It was a fire that did not roar, but refused to go out. That fire led him to rise each day for nearly 9 decades to serve, to speak, to act. Even as his health crumbled, his resolve remained. He smiled through pain, knelt in prayer despite trembling knees, and clung to the mission when rest would have been easier. In a world that often mistakes power for volume, he taught us that real strength burns in silence. And when pneumonia stole his breath, it could not touch his spirit. He did not go out like a star that fades, but like a torch handed to the next bearer. His fire was not extinguished, it was multiplied, in hearts, in actions, in the belief that mercy is worth every breath, not a throne but a table. His humble reign. Francis never saw the papacy as a throne to sit on, but a table to gather others around. He invited the stranger, the sinner, the skeptic. He traded golden robes for simple vestments and power for presence. He understood that holiness was not about separation, but nearness. In his world, the first became last, and the last were lifted. He broke bread with prisoners, dined with the poor, and challenged the church to stop performing and start loving. Even in death, that table remains. His chair may now be empty, but the invitation still stands. Come as you are. Come broken. Come hopeful. Come weary. That was always his message. You belong. And as we now gather in memory of him, it is around that same table, one he made long enough for the whole world to sit at. He was a pope who fed us, not with grandeur, but with grace. The bells of St. Peter's, echoes of a prophet. As the bells rang from the dome of St. Peter's, the world heard more than mourning. It heard memory. Every chime a reminder of words once whispered from balconies and pulpits. Words of peace, courage, and uncomfortable truth. Pope Francis was no diplomat. He was a prophet. He disrupted silence with justice. He refused comfort when it came at the cost of truth. He spoke boldly where others stayed neutral. And when the bells rang, it was not just for the end of a life, but the sound of a life that had meant something. They rang for the poor he defended, the wounded he embraced, the liars he called to account. Those bells rang for the soul of the church he tried to heal. They echoed across continents, not as farewell, but as challenge. The prophet is gone, but his voice still rings. Will we listen? From dust to light. The legacy lives on. Now he returns to dust, but his light remains. Pope Francis is gone, but his legacy is alive in every shelter that opens its doors, every voice that dares to forgive, every hand that washes the feet of another. He called us to radical humility, and now we are called to carry it forward. His death does not silence him, it amplifies him. His final words were not for admiration, but for action. In every corner of the world where his name is whispered in prayer, his spirit answers. Not with thunder, but with the quiet strength of grace. This is not an ending, it is a beginning where we choose not to idolize him, but to imitate him, where we remember that faith is not just spoken, it's lived, and in that living, he will never truly be gone. From dust he came, to light he now returns. A dawn cloaked in silence, The Morning Pope. Francis died. Vatican City awoke not to the bustling footsteps of pilgrims, nor the rustle of cassocks in prayer, but to a silence heavy with grief. The air itself seemed to pause as news broke. Pope Francis, the gentle shepherd of 1.3 billion souls, had passed away peacefully at the age of 88. Above the apostolic palace, flags hung limp against the sky. Bells tolled, not in routine but in reverence, as their sound rippled across continents. It was not just the death of a man, but the closing of a chapter defined by compassion, truth, and courageous mercy. His end came not with spectacle, but serenity, like a whisper returned to heaven. As Rome stood still, so did the world. In every echo of the bells, in every tear shed, one truth became clear. The voice of the church had grown quiet, and yet in that quiet, his legacy thundered. The final days, a shepherd's gentle farewell. Even as illness gnawed at his frail frame, Pope Francis remained steadfast, ministering to others with the warmth of a father's love. Respiratory complications returned with vengeance, yet he resisted retreat. His final days were not cloaked in isolation, but illuminated by quiet devotion. He received visitors, celebrated intimate masses, and scribbled letters to the forgotten corners of the world. In stillness, he prepared a final message, not of fear, but of grace. Those close to him watched his body slow, yet his spirit remained resolute. His words carried urgency, not desperation. In hushed conversations, he spoke of death not as a foe, but as a faithful companion. He chose not to surrender to hospital walls, but to dwell among the prayers and icons that shaped his life. His last days were a gentle undoing, a holy withdrawal, reminding the world that endings too can be filled with sacred light. The final message, a soul's offering to the world. Just before his passing, Pope Francis released what now feels like a spiritual will, an echo from the edge of eternity. It wasn't a political treatise or doctrinal rebuke. It was a balm for the weary soul, tender and clear. He called for courage and compassion, for faith not as rhetoric, but as action. He spoke of kindness that costs something, the kind that walks into pain and chooses to stay. He begged the church not to close its doors, but to open its arms wider. His words weren't adorned with grandeur, but carried the sacred weight of lived truth. It was the message of a man who had seen the world's suffering, yet believed in its healing. Translated into dozens of languages, his message was read aloud in churches, prisons, and war zones alike. His final gift wasn't doctrine, it was direction, a path forward, a challenge to love. The world responds, a global mourning. From the snowy peaks of the Andes to the bustling streets of Manila, from cathedrals in Paris to village chapels in Nigeria, the world wept. Not in panic, but in reverent sorrow. Candles were lit, prayers whispered, and rosaries clutched in trembling hands. Some remembered his laughter, others his embrace. Even heads of state paused to bow their heads, not just for a pope, but for a man who had walked humbly among kings and beggars alike. Vigils erupted not because they were commanded, but because they were needed. This was not a distant mourning confined to the Vatican. It was intimate and global. It was grief braided with gratitude. For many, he had not just been a religious figure, but a companion in their pain, a voice in their silence, a light in their night. The bells tolled for Francis, but they rang for all of us too. The people's pope, a life of walking among us. Pope Francis redefined papal authority not from on high, but from the ground. He embraced lepers, kissed the feet of prisoners, and entered war zones without flinching. He traded royal robes for humility and power for presence. He dined with the homeless, knelt beside refugees, and carried the church's mission into the shadows. His papacy was not performance, it was participation. He didn't just preach love, he lived it in the alleys, the prisons, the tents of the displaced. He became a brother, not just a bishop, and because of that, the world loved him. His leadership was not in lofty decrees, but in listening. Not in isolation, but in incarnation. He walked where many had forgotten to look. He taught us that holiness is not grandiose, it's intimate. His path was not paved in marble, but in mud, tears, and human touch. And that's where the church became real again. The empty chair, a church in transition. His seat now stands empty, a stark symbol of a transition, both spiritual and human. But the emptiness is not void, it is invitation. Cardinals will soon gather beneath the soaring dome of St. Peter's Basilica, cloaked in crimson and responsibility. The world will watch, the church will pray. Another chapter must begin. Yet this moment is not just about succession, it's about reflection. Who are we without him? What shall we carry forward? Pope Francis reawakened the church's conscience. Now the church must choose to echo his heart or retreat to comfort. His absence will be felt in the spaces where silence used to be filled with mercy, where fear was once replaced with action. But his teachings, his tenderness, his truth, they do not fade. They are now in our hands. The chair is empty, yes, but the spirit it once held, that belongs to the people now. The quiet strength of a wounded body behind the scenes, his health had been fragile for years. A lung infection from his youth returned in his final winter, masked at first by his unwavering smile. But pneumonia proved relentless. His steps slowed, his voice thinned, his sentences grew more deliberate, more sacred. Yet even as the world speculated, he never sought pity. He lived with pain as one might live with prayer. Patiently, his body betrayed him, but his resolve never did. He did not disappear into isolation. He remained among his books, his icons, his chapel. He continued to bless, to write, to meet. He chose presence over retreat. His weakness became a new form of strength, not physical, but spiritual. It revealed the depth of a man who never led with power, but with purpose. He showed us that courage sometimes looks like trembling hands still raised in blessing, and in that, he remained whole. Legacy of mercy, a church made tender. From his first request, "Pray for me," to his final breath, Pope Francis led with vulnerability. He made the church feel again. He reminded it to bend before lifting others, to listen before it speaks. He shattered walls between the sacred and the suffering. Under his guidance, mercy wasn't a doctrine, it was a doorway, a place where the forgotten could enter and the broken could rest. He called for tenderness that wasn't weakness, but costly strength. His reforms were not only administrative, they were human. He fought for the environment, for the poor, for the marginalized. He urged the church to stop guarding itself and start giving itself. His papacy will be remembered not for grand encyclicals, but for moments of unexpected grace. A phone call to a grieving mother, a hug for a child with no home. That was his church, and now it must become ours. Echoes of his voice, the words that remain. Though his voice no longer echoes through the Vatican halls, it still resounds. In letters pinned to parish walls, in whispered prayers across hospital beds, in the trembling words of those who met him once and never forgot. His final message is already being recited like scripture, not because of its eloquence, but because of its honesty. It was the voice of a man who had stood at the intersection of despair and hope, and still chose hope. His legacy is not just carved in marble or etched into papal documents. It is written on hearts. His voice, firm yet tender, didn't just preach truth, it revealed it. Now his echo belongs to the world. In classrooms, in prisons, in the desert silence of prayer, it will continue to speak. Choose mercy. Stand with the forgotten. Love without fear. This is the resonance of a life well lived in a soul well given. The flame passed on, a future born in grief. This is not the end. This is the transfer of a torch, lit not by ceremony, but by compassion. Pope Francis has left us not with certainty, but with a challenge. To love more, to serve humbler, to step forward into unknowns with open hands. His death is not defeat, it is invitation. To become the church he dreamed of, uncloistered, unafraid, unyielding in love. His legacy is a living one, ignited in the hearts of those who believe the gospel must be walked, not just read. He died with a heart still burning, and now that fire must move. From Rome to the refugee camp, From the basilica to the broken home, the bells have tolled, the morning has begun. But soon voices will rise, not to replace his, but to continue it. A new chapter will come, but for now, we hold the flame he left behind.